It all starts when portals scatter across the globe, yet people live their lives peacefully, completely unbothered by these portals. And among those people was our MC, Yoon Ga-on, who was thrilled to finally leave the orphanage and start his independent life. He knows that life as an orphan isn't easy at all, but he feels relieved to have a government financial aid fund to rely on. Ga-on remembers the advice from the orphanage director, who told him to save his allowance to try and triple the amount in the future. He wished it were that easy, but the worst part is that there is also inflation to deal with. When he was a child, he got super excited imagining that if he just skipped eating 100 hamburgers, he would get double the money later. Thanks to that valuable advice, Ga-on managed to save quite a bit of money, which ended up tripling in his savings account. He arrives at the bank full of joy, thinking that with this money he will be able to pay his rent deposit. But since our MC has terrible luck, a masked guy shows up at the bank entrance. Once inside the bank, Ga-on calmly asks the teller to process the wire transfer and open a new youth savings account. He does the math and realizes he will still have over 31 million won left over, ensuring a smooth and peaceful path for his life. Suddenly, the robber bursts into the bank, shattering the glass window and shouting to everyone that a robbery is taking place. The people waiting in line panic and start whispering about the sheer audacity of such a sudden heist. The criminal raises his sword, ordering everyone not to move, leaving Ga-on in utter despair as he sees his peaceful future go down the drain. He points the bladed weapon at the hostages, screaming for everyone to freeze and put their hands up immediately. With a furious glare, the robber threateningly insists that no one dare make a single suspicious move. At that moment, the bank security guard draws his revolver and, trembling, orders the criminal not to take another step. But the robber didn't show the slightest bit of fear. He then begins to spin his sword at high speed and drops into a fighting stance while daring the guard to shoot Ga-on, and the others are in absolute shock, suspecting that the criminal is actually an awakened. The story explains that over a decade ago, mysterious portals began popping up all corners of the world. Along with the appearance of these portals, a massive number of terrifying monsters began invading Earth to protect humanity. Brave warriors rushed to the front lines of battle to fight off these threats. These warriors managed to awaken a mysterious magical power to face the creatures. They became special individuals who completely surpassed the limits of an ordinary human being. Because of these extraordinary abilities, these warriors became known worldwide as the awakened Ga-on Panics, deducing that if the robber really is an awakened, he will be able to dodge bullets easily. Even so, the bank security guard decides to act and fires his gun directly at the criminal. The fired bullet travels at high speed through the air, heading straight toward the robber. The projectile rapidly approaches the criminal's head, while he remains frozen in his combat stance. He flashes a wicked, confident grin, believing he will block the attack without any trouble at all. The robber makes a swift motion with his sword, trying to deflect the incoming bullet. The hostages watch the scene, terrified and jaw-dropped, fearing the absolute worst outcome for the confrontation. After that shot, the criminal had a smile on his face. But in reality, it was just a blank stare, because the bullet hit the guy right in the middle of his forehead. He falls unconscious to the floor, muttering that bullets are just too fast, while dropping his sword right beside him. Ga-on turns bright red with embarrassment as the people around whisper, asking who on earth said he would dodge the bullets. The guard asks if everyone is all right, but the sword lying on the floor begins to glow with a sinister purple energy. A red gem on the hilt of the weapon shines intensely, revealing that something alive and malevolent is inside it. The cursed sword begins to speak, calling the unconscious robber completely useless for being defeated so easily. It then commands the humans to pick it up to receive immense power. While a young woman notices the weapon is evil, the sword's voice tries to seduce the crowd, telling them to accumulate blood karma, while a man screams for no one to touch it. An elderly woman begins to be possessed by the purple energy, saying she wants that overwhelming power to teach her husband a lesson. Talk about a tough marriage. Chaos spreads through the bank as more people fall under the influence of the dark mist and begin acting erratically. A man wearing glasses desperately begs everyone to hold the line as the evil influence of the sword takes over the place. At that moment, Ga-on suddenly stands up, completely consumed by greed. He sounds just like Gollum, muttering that the sword is his precious. And then, he charges full speed toward the sword while people scream at him to stop. The surrounding crowd panics, realizing he has been completely captivated by that evil weapon, driven by absolute greed. Ga-on scrambles across the floor like a madman, dodging every single obstacle with ease. The bank guard steps right in front of the youth, shouting firmly that he will absolutely not let him pass. With extreme agility, Ga-on slides across the floor, easily slipping past the guard, and manages to grab the cursed sword. A massive explosion of purple energy erupts as Gaon raises the weapon, laughing insanely while the hostages shriek in terror. The dark energy completely envelops the young man's hand, sealing the direct physical contact with the terrifying artifact. Shortly after, the smoke begins to clear, and Gaon drops to his knees on the floor, silently holding the sword. The hostages watch the scene, feeling helpless and sad, believing the poor student has been completely possessed by the malevolent entity. The guard approaches cautiously and asks if Gaon is okay, relieved to see that the illusion controlling the others has vanished. Gaon remains still, with his head bowed down, causing the worried guard to keep calling out his name. Inside his mind, Gaon comes face to face with a giant flaming eye that cheerfully introduces itself as his new master. The entity explains that as proof of their spiritual pact, Gaon must offer up whatever he holds most precious in life. The boy panics upon hearing the demand, but the demon laughs and asks if he doesn't want to receive the promised power. The creature promises to grant him the ultimate power to rule the world and stand above all other people. Completely determined, Gaon shouts that he wants that power badly, prompting the sword to demand his most precious possession. With a fixed, unwavering gaze, the young man mentally prepares to make the ultimate sacrifice the demon requested. Back in reality, the security guard gets a massive fright when Gaon suddenly stands up, brandishing the sword. He stands with his back to the crowd, trembling slightly as a mysterious aura floats around his body. Out of nowhere, Gaon bursts into a loud, maniacal laughter, leaving the guard and everyone present completely bewildered. He begins to sprint wildly around the establishment with the sword in hand, causing the witnesses to scream in desperation. However, instead of attacking the people, Gaon runs straight toward the service counters under the confused stares of the hostages. With a massive grin on his face, the young man reaches out his arm and slams his savings passbook hard onto the bank counter. The teller is left completely stunned and confused, staring at the savings passbook sitting right in front of her. Moments later, she tremblingly announces that the wire transfer is complete, leaving the demon sword absolutely shocked and utterly confused. The weapon asks if his most precious thing was really money, and Gaon confirms that he sacrificed his 31 million won. He dramatically laments the steep price of power, while the sword, Hyukryo, fumes with rage over making a pact for mere cash. Even though it is completely outraged, the sword realizes the ritual worked and begins to wonder how on earth that was possible. Gaon walks toward the bank exit and begins to wonder where the grand power promised to him in the pact is. While Gaon argues that he offered up his precious asset, Hyukryo complains but ultimately accepts the money as the pact's offering. Suddenly, a blue-haired woman steps up behind Gaon and coldly orders him not to make a single move. Next, she prepares to pull something out and flashes an identification badge showing she belongs to a government organization and she is there to arrest the MC. She introduces herself as Kang Chung-hwa from the Hunter Department's Special Task Force and commands him to drop the sword. Gaon falls into a total panic, knowing that members of this division usually eliminate anyone who disobeys orders. He immediately throws the weapon behind him and raises his hands, asking if they are all good now. However, the sword was unexpectedly still in his hand. Desperate, he tries to fling the weapon away in every possible way, but it instantly reappears right between his fingers. The boy screams, asking why this is happening, and the sword mocks him, saying they are now bound forever by the contract. Seeing that he is not complying, Chung-hwa activates a mysterious power in her hand. The gauntlet on her arm begins to transform and charge a massive amount of destructive energy. She points the charged weapon directly at Gaon's face, who raises his hands in sheer terror, begging for just a second. The young man desperately explains that he is trying to let go of the sword, but it keeps coming back on its own, while the weapon screams that it wants blood. Ignoring his excuses completely, the special agent locks her sight and charges the energy blast to its maximum level. Realizing his life is in imminent danger, Gaon sees no other choice but to scream desperately that he surrenders. Meanwhile, the sword Hyukryo vibrates with malice and screams for the agent to just shoot and put an end to the boy. Inside the bank, family members manage to hold back the elderly woman who was possessed, calming her down as the sword spell wears off. Sometime later, Gaon appears sitting in a well-lit interrogation room, nervously waiting to learn his fate. A man in a suit enters the room and formally introduces himself as Park Do-kyung, the leader of the Special Task Force's second team. Gaon introduces himself as an unemployed youth fresh out of an orphanage. While the leader chuckles and says the cameras proved his innocence, the boy feels relieved by the news but complains that he almost lost his life because the agents didn't believe him and attacked out of nowhere. Do-kyung gives an awkward laugh and tries to lighten the mood, explaining that his subordinate, Agent Chung-hwa, is just a bit rigid. He then seriously explains to Gaon that his situation is delicate, since he ended up making a pact with a cursed magical artifact. He tells him that the weapon is a demon sword capable of corrupting its host, making Gaon understand why everyone else acted so strangely. Gaon asks what he needs to do to get rid of it, and Do-kyung says the bond is strong, and it will be difficult to remove it without breaking the contract. The leader ponders that since even an elderly woman and a child resisted the temptation, the sword must be an E-rank cursed object at best. Gaon lets out a mocking chuckle regarding the low rank, leaving the sword furious that he was the only fool to fall for the trick everyone else resisted. Upon realizing he was the only sucker to buy into the talk of such a weak weapon, Gaon goes into shock and feels extremely embarrassed. Trying to change the subject, the boy asks if there is any way to get his money back, since that amount was his entire life savings. The leader shakes his head sideways, warning that trying to reverse the terms of a soul contract with a sword can cause serious damage. Resigned, Gaon accepts the loss and decides to view the lost money as a good deed for the orphanage where he grew up, since the fund came from there anyway. Outside, Do-kyung bids the young man goodbye, telling him to stay safe and to contact them immediately if anything strange happens. Chung-hwa questions if it is safe to leave a civilian free with a weapon like that, but the boss explains that the government's quarantine wing is completely full. The leader looks down at his own hand and, visibly tense, begins trying to pry a golden ring with a glowing red gem off his finger. He strains heavily, using his fingers to pull at the cursed accessory, which seems completely fused to his skin. Sweating cold and grinding his teeth from the painful effort, the leader's eyes glow an eerie shade of orange due to the curse. Do-kyung lets out a sigh of extreme exhaustion upon failing the attempt, realizing it is impossible to tear the object off by brute force. He frustratingly concludes that even they cannot remove cursed objects and asks if Agent Kang would be capable of performing such a feat. The young blue-haired agent stares at her own gloved hand in absolute silence, thoughtfully reflecting on her boss's question. With a serious and direct look, Chung-hwa honestly admits to the leader that she does not possess the power to remove these objects either. The leader agrees, recalling that any human who is overtaken by the influence of a cursed object can never escape their fate. Do-kyung adds with a grim look that sooner or later, all wielders of these weapons end up being consumed by the corruption. However, he remembers that Gaon tried to throw the sword away of his own free will, even knowing it would return to his hand. He also ponders that other people resisted the temptation easily and that the young man's pact offering was made simply with money. With that, the boss concludes that the weapon does not pose an urgent threat and that Gaon does not seem to care all that much about losing his savings. Chung-hwa questions if the sword's level is too low to corrupt him, and Do-kyung says that is possible, since he does not have immunity to corruption. The agent asks if there are any known cases of people with such immunity, but the leader answers that there has never been a single record since the opening of the portals. Do-kyung then decides that the best course of action for now is simply to keep the young man under constant observation to avoid any surprises. Far away from there, Gaon walks peacefully along the city sidewalk, carrying the demon sword in his hand without caring about the stairs. The boy thinks to himself that he only agreed to keep the weapon to prevent it from falling into the hands of an innocent civilian and causing trouble. He decides to walk into a convenience store, greeted by the clerk who welcomes him automatically from behind the counter. He mentally complains about being hungry after so much trouble today. While the clerk goes into shock upon spotting the armed youth entering the premises, Gaon grumbles quietly at the sword, telling it to stop talking about blood, which makes the employee think he is a complete lunatic. When trying to ring up a bowl of ramen, the clerk informs him that his card has insufficient funds, leaving him confused at being unable to pay for something so cheap. It is at that exact moment that Gaon desperately remembers that his entire savings were transferred as a permanent donation to the orphanage. He freaks out and starts shaking the sword, demanding his money back, making the terrified clerk think the robber has revealed his true colors. Suddenly, the elderly woman from the bank bursts into the store, screaming maniacally that she wants absolute power to teach her husband a lesson. Gaon is left completely baffled when the lady charges at him, while the clerk hides behind the counter, desperately calling the police. Shortly after, a police officer enters the convenience store, searching precisely for a missing elderly woman who was wandering around the area. The officer comes face to face with Gaon holding the sword up high, while the elderly woman grabs him bizarrely right in the middle of the store aisle. Startled by the scene, the officer draws his firearm and shouts for Gaon to put his hands up, accusing him of being an armed kidnapper. The young man screams desperately that it is all a misunderstanding, while the old woman keeps yelling that she wants blood and power from that sword. In the end, the blue-haired agent appears at the scene and manages to clear up the entire mess quickly and efficiently. Later on, Changhua and the leader debate about the youth once again, reinforcing that there has never truly been anyone immune to corruption. The boss reaffirms that because of this, the team needs to continue monitoring the young man's every move closely from now on. The scene cuts back to the young man walking alone down the street with the sword in hand, completely unaware that he is being watched. A week passes, and Gaon is seen walking through the city looking extremely exhausted, worn down and with deep dark circles under his eyes. Pedestrians crossing his path begin to whisper and judge him, commenting that he must be a total lunatic for walking around armed in public. With his teeth clenched from so much accumulated anger, the young man can barely contain his fury in the face of the public's judgment. Grabbing the hilt of the sword with hatred, he furious murmurs with glowing eyes that this entire terrible situation is solely its fault. To understand how things reached this point, the story flashes back 1 week in time, to the moment Gaon walks into a job interview. Back in the past, the interviewers in suits and glasses hear a strange metallic clanging coming from the door and instantly perk up. Gaon enters the room with glowing eyes and energetically announces that he is a young talent, ready to give his life for the company. With a bizarre smile and flashing teeth, he formally introduces himself as candidate number 13. Terrified by the boy's maniacal look and the weapon, the men scream in panic for him to get out, calling him a dangerous threat. With that disastrous presentation, Gaon's resume immediately receives a massive red stamp marked rejected. In another interview for manual labor, Gaon carries a heavy box with ease, but ends up rejected for carrying a sword. He tries out for a sales position, but startles the manager by desperately begging to be heard while clutching the evil weapon. Trying to work as a waiter, the sword fastened to his waist bumps into a table and knocks things over, resulting in yet another rejection. Discouraged, Gaon adjusts his tie and realizes he needs to find a way to hide the sword if he wants to pass any interview. In a new attempt, the friendly interviewer says there is no problem at all and that their company is not that strict with rules. The cheerful, chubby man praises Gaon, saying he seems like a very hard-working and attentive young man, declaring him hired. He extends his hand with a large smile and welcomes the youth, inviting him to seal the deal with a friendly handshake. Gaon is extremely happy with the opportunity and quickly extends his hand to greet his new boss. However, before their hands can even touch, a brilliant red light suddenly begins to emanate from the cursed sword. The interviewer's smile vanishes in an instant as he notices the tip of a sharp blade appearing right in front of his face. The sword simply flies into Gaon's hand against his will, pointing directly at the neck of the terrified man. The boss screams desperately for security, calling him an attacker, while Gaon panics, trying to explain it was all a mistake. Back in the present, the young man walks downcast along the street while people back away from him in fear of that exposed weapon. Feeling an immense frustration, Gaon glares at the sword and furiously rants that all his problems are entirely its fault. In a fit of rage, he hurls the cursed sword with all his might toward the sky, telling it to get out of his life once and for all. However, in less than a second, the sword mysteriously reappears tightly gripped between his fingers, automatically. Frustrated at being unable to rid himself of the cursed object, Gaon cries in despair and screams at the top of his lungs for the weapon to go away. The demon sword manifests and commands the young man not to fight against destiny, demanding that he take lives to accumulate bad karma. Gaon says he has zero interest in that, but feels a strong dizziness as the purple energy begins to coat his body. He falls to his knees, clutching his head in pain, while the voice in his mind mocks him, saying his 1 week resistance has ended right there. The entity commands the youth to execute evil and unleash all his accumulated dark desires once and for all. Gaon agonizes in pain as the black smoke spreads, trying to resist the terrible, corrupting influence of the demon sword. Suddenly, the young man's left eye glows intensely, a bright crimson tone, showing he has finally given in to the corruption. With a grim expression, Gaon says he will no longer hold back his desires, leaving the sword proud that he is beginning his descent into darkness under the effect of the corruption. The young man sticks his hand into his pocket and quickly pulls out 3 energy cereal bars he had stored away. He rips open the plastic wrappers with a scary, maniacal grin on his face, as if he were about to commit a heinous crime. Next, he stuffs all the energy bars into his mouth at the exact same time, chewing them wildly and desperately, with his eyes wide in absolute pleasure. Gaon devours the sweets in seconds, as if it were the most rebellious and forbidden act of his life. The demon sword, Hukryo, watches the scene totally confused, unable to comprehend what on earth its wielder is doing. The young man brags about eating 3 bars at once when the packaging recommendation was to consume only 1 per meal. With an expression of pure malice, he tightly crushes the empty wrapper in his hand, preparing for his next move. He runs over to an empty children's playground and flings the plastic wrapper onto the sandy ground like it's a dangerous grenade. The trash lands in the kids' playground sand, marking what Gaon considers a terrible act of disrespect toward the environment. With a proud smile, he points at the littered trash and tells the sword he didn't even recycle the wrapper, leaving it utterly indignant at the stupidity, holding the weapon up high. Gaon joyfully celebrates that now he no longer needs to hide his worst impulses from society. He brandishes the sword, firmly believing that littering in the playground was enough to accumulate a massive amount of bad karma. Suddenly, the trance of corruption fades and Gaon snaps back to consciousness, looking horrified at his own hands. He cries desperately and blames the cursed sword for corrupting his soul and making him commit such a shameful act of pollution. Immediately regretful, the boy bends down, scoops up the crushed wrapper from the sand, and correctly throws it into a public trash can. He wipes the sweat from his forehead in relief, believing he has reversed his bad deed and cleansed his soul of the sword's terrible corruption. However, a purple smoke begins to rise around him out of nowhere, leaving the youth confused and alert at that strange reaction. Gaon remembers the leader's warning about the danger of trying to reverse the causality of a soul pact. While feeling his body burn, a dimensional portal opens right under his feet and sucks Gaon into a dark vortex while he screams desperately. The boy takes a sharp gasp and opens his eyes, startled, suddenly waking up from that bizarre and dangerous trance. He realizes he is lying on the floor of a comfortable residential bedroom, not understanding how or when he managed to get back to his own house. Upon touching the floor of his own bedroom, Gaon startles as he notices the ground is extremely hot and stuffy. He looks up and notices that the air conditioning unit is also turned on, running at the exact same time as the heater. To make matters worse, he notices that the bedroom window is completely wide open. Wasting all that electricity, Gaon falls into total despair upon realizing the energy waste and the sheer size of the bill that will come for his electricity and gas. He realizes that the cause and effect reversal of the contract's punishment forced him to commit much worse domestic evils against his will. He remembers other petty actions he was forced to do, like only giving directions with words instead of walking the person over. Another terrible act was pretending he didn't see someone running and letting the elevator door close without pressing the button to hold it. He also recalls with shame having sat comfortably in the priority seats reserved for the elderly and pregnant women. And the absolute worst of all his terrible secrets was having discreetly picked his nose when he thought nobody was watching him. The boy laments on his knees for doing such awful things, while the sword complains on the hot floor that it is being cooked alive. Gaon feels guilty for thinking about food after these acts, while the sword Hyukryo thinks it's ridiculous that such silly things are considered sins. He opens the fridge and lets out a discouraged sigh upon realizing he is completely out of food at home and will need to go grocery shopping to solve the problem of missing supplies. Gaon decides to walk to a large local supermarket to buy groceries. Inside, he gets super happy upon finding a tray of good quality meat with an unmissable discount of 50% off. As he walks along with his cart, the sword fastened to his waist makes a loud metallic clanging sound, startling the other customers around. Suddenly, a store employee notices the unusual situation and calls out to Gaon in a loud voice right in the middle of the aisle. The employee complains harshly, questioning how he has the audacity to enter a standard family supermarket armed with a sword. At the checkout, Gaon places his groceries on the counter, but the cashier finds it strange to see that he is using a government aid card. She asks, surprised if he isn't a hunter, leaving him confused by the questioning regarding the reason he walks around armed. The woman begins a long, tiring lecture about the lack of manners in today's youth, leaving the boy desperate. Luckily, the card machine emits a quick beep, confirming that the payment for the groceries is finally completed successfully. Gaon grabs his bags quickly, offers an awkward apology, and runs out of the store to escape that embarrassing lecture. Lying in his bed already, he sighs in relief and reflects that people always mistake him for an official hunter because of the sword. Thinking better about the matter, he realizes that if he actually became a hunter, nobody would hassle him anymore for using the sword. Interested in the idea of changing direction, he grabs his phone and begins searching the internet about the routine and work of hunters. He reads that ever since the emergence of the portals, this new profession was created with the goal of stopping monsters from invading our world. The research details that defense forces use heavy firearms and military tanks to fight off the largest threats in groups. There are also special government divisions made up of highly trained agents who handle specific and more dangerous cases. And finally, there are civilian hunters, ordinary people who awakened magical powers and fight the creatures in exchange for great rewards. The article concludes by explaining that licensed hunters are authorized to explore the dangerous dark worlds that exist beyond the portals. Gaon looks thoughtfully at his phone screen, remembering the rumors saying these professionals make a ton of money. Suddenly, the sword Hyukryo begins to tremble on the floor and screams hungrily for blood, startling the boy who was focused on his phone. He glares at the weapon, remembering it is only E rank, while the sword keeps shouting for him to gain power to rule the world. Facing the annoying persistence of the demonic artifact, Gaon begins to wonder if the sword would accept consuming fluids other than blood. He then sits up on the bed, grabs the hilt of the weapon, and says he is going to feed it what it wants, leaving the sword extremely excited. Hyukryo vibrates with joy, believing it will finally taste some fresh blood after spending so much time in that youth's hand. Gaon takes the sword to the bathroom and begins to urinate directly over the weapon's blade, which initially finds the situation a bit strange. Feeling the warm liquid run down its metal, the sword happily celebrates finally receiving a warm meal after such a long time. While greedily consuming the liquid, Hyukryo comments that the blood tastes a bit salty, and Gaon lies, saying people just eat a lot of salt these days. The weapon also complains that the smell is a bit odd, but the boy makes up the excuse that people's cholesterol is just very high nowadays. Gaon finishes taking care of his business in the bathroom peacefully, wearing the expression of someone who just pulled off the perfect prank. Suspecting absolutely nothing, the demon sword lets out a sigh of satisfaction, thanking him for the invigorating meal it received. Gaon cleans the blade using the bathroom sprayer, thinking that urine is just a fluid filtered from blood, and laughing that the sword drank it all. He concludes that if it accepted that, it doesn't necessarily need human blood, and monster blood should work just fine, too. Distrustful of the treatment, Hyukryo begins to question the host about exactly where he managed to draw such warm blood from. With a sarcastic smile, the young man makes up a story that he just stabbed a handsome guy out on the street, but the sword immediately spots the blatant lie. It snaps back angrily that someone who considers littering in the playground an evil act would never hurt a human. Telling him to stop joking around, Hyukryo harshly demands that the boy tell the absolute truth about the origin of that fluid. It just ingested with such relish. Gaon cleansed the metal in absolute silence with a grim look, making the sword tremble and fear that the consumed liquid wasn't actually blood. Upon realizing the terrible truth of Gaon's prank, Hyukryo falls into complete despair and curses the boy, horrified by what it drank in the bathroom. Maintaining his calm, Gaon says the most important thing is that the sword filled its belly with satisfaction, leaving the demonic artifact even more confused. With a sarcastic smile on his face, the boy says he is going to tell the sword an old parable to help it comprehend the situation. He begins to narrate the story of a great and respected Buddhist monk from the past, named Master Wonhyo Gaon, tells that one day the monk spent the night in a cave, and waking up very thirsty in the dark, drank water from a bowl nearby. However, in the morning, he realized in shock that the bowl was actually a human skull, and that he had drunk rainwater accumulated inside it. Upon gagging, the monk had a grand enlightenment about the reason the exact same water had seemed delicious the night before. The master understood that all pain and pleasure are created solely by each individual's mind, and that everything in the world arises from a single thought. He concluded that what he had drunk in the darkness was not just stagnant water, but rather his own thirst to live in that moment of agony. Gaon continues with the Buddhist teaching, deeply explaining that everything we see is just emptiness taking form in the real world. He says the very essence of blood is also nothing more than emptiness in the universe, causing the sword's blade to glow with a powerful golden energy. The young man concludes that by accepting this truth, blood and urine become the exact same thing. Leaving the sword in complete panic at the revelation, Gaon just watches indifferently as the weapon lies dropped before him on the bedroom floor after delivering his highly unconventional philosophy lesson. The sword begins to cry desperately, and the boy apologizes, promising to feed it real blood if it stops making a scene. Meanwhile, in a dark and misty forest, someone hides startled behind a tree trunk surrounded by the bodies of dead hunters. The surviving mustachioed hunter is sweating cold and panting from pure terror, desperately trying not to make a single sound so he won't be caught. Another body of a uniformed warrior appears sprawled on the bloody forest floor, showing the gravity of that terrible massacre. Several well-equipped warriors lie lifeless through the dark woods, victims of a mysterious force that eliminated them without any mercy. The survivor despairs in silence, wondering how a routine mission could go so wrong and end in a tragedy like that. Suddenly, sharp claws begin to slowly grip the bark of the tree where the man is hiding, revealing that the threat is right behind him. A dark silhouette with a macabre smile emerges, brandishing a demon sword, causing the hunter to let out a scream of absolute terror upon being discovered. Back in the present, Gaon walks under the sunlight toward the imposing headquarters of the official association in charge of managing hunters. He enters the premises and politely tells the front desk clerk that he would like to sign up to obtain his professional hunter license. Shortly after, his official document is successfully printed, recording his name and defining his initial rank as a level 0 hunter. The clerk hands a welcome kit to the youth and warns him that he will need to purchase any extra combat equipment out of his own pocket. She explains that he is required to complete at least one weekly mission to keep the license active and avoid having the document revoked for inactivity. Gaon stands in the hallway holding his new document and shopping bag with the expression of someone who expected something much harder. He complains about not having to take a practical test since he was eager to show off his slashing skills in front of the examiners. The young man pulls out his phone and decides to access the official mission portal to find a quick job and fulfill his mandatory weekly goal. He finds a simple sample collection mission in the Gangbuk region that offers a very good reward of 1,000,001. Gaon's eyes widen, flashing with greed upon seeing the reward amount, barely able to believe his luck in getting so much easy money. Without thinking twice, he immediately clicks the blue button on his cell phone screen to accept the service offered. Later on, Gaon arrives at the meeting point isolated by barriers, where a mysterious purple portal stands open in the middle of the city street. He observes the surroundings with curiosity and begins analyzing the clothes and weapons of the other warriors, who are also waiting there. Noticing that everyone carries modern rifles and pistols, he begins to wonder if firearms really are more efficient than swords. The other hunters laugh behind Gaon's back upon seeing that he brought only a sword, maliciously commenting that he is just a rookie with no style. A friendly and amiable man with a rifle in hand approaches and asks in a friendly tone if that is Gaon's first career mission. He laughs happily, saying that brings back memories, recalling that in his rebellious youth, he also insisted on using just a regular sword. Suddenly, a female employee in a suit calls for everyone's attention, announcing the start of the mandatory karma index measurement. While a warrior complains upon receiving an index of over 5,000 after a week off, Gaon asks his companion what that means. The man explains that hunting in portals accumulates karma and that passing 5,000 greatly increases the risk of corruption, which is why they bar anyone who hits that limit. Gaon listens to the explanation with close attention, finding the association's safety system very well designed to protect hunters. Next, the serious mustachioed hunter is evaluated by the device and cleared for the mission upon registering a safe index of nearly 3,000 points. The companion praises the man's purification speed, explaining that keeping the index low, even while constantly entering portals, is a sign of pure talent. He then asks if Gaon has ever measured his index before, clarifying that the lower the initial value, the greater the hunter's innate talent. He adds that scores in the 800 range already reveal a prodigy, highlighting that the talented warrior started with 780. The companion encourages Gaon, saying he could get an excellent value, while the employee calls the next warrior in the measurement line. Upon being measured, Gaon's friendly companion grows tense as he registers over 4,500 points, deciding he will need to rest after this. Right after, the employee in the suit calls out the name Yoon-ga-on, and the young man steps forward calmly to undergo his first measurement. She points the electronic reader at the youth's forehead, and the display emits a sharp beep as it analyzes the amount of dark energy present in him. Looking at the device screen, the employee's eyes widen, and she turns completely pale and speechless upon seeing Gaon's karma value. The employee in the suit stares at the device screen completely paralyzed and sweating nervously, unable to comprehend the result that just appeared right before her eyes. The surrounding hunters fall into absolute shock when the employee stammers and reveals that the measured value is 58,466 points. Upon hearing that absurd number, all the armed guards instantly panic and point their rifles directly at Gaon, screaming that he is corrupted. Desperate and terrified, the young man raises his hands and begs his friendly veteran companion for help, so he won't be gunned down right then and there. One of the guards screams in rage with wide eyes, calling Gaon corrupted scum and preparing to shoot to kill. While the tension reaches its limit, Gaon simply stands still with his hands up, wearing a totally confused expression, not understanding the reason for all the fuss. Suddenly, the employee in the suit raises her hand and desperately apologizes, explaining to everyone that she simply read the number wrong. She corrects herself, saying the index is actually 0.58, leaving the young man relieved but extremely confused by that unbelievable value. After the entire misunderstanding is cleared up, the group finally crosses through the portal and enters a dark and mysterious forest inside the monster world. Gaon walks cautiously through the area wearing a gas mask, holding his sword firmly while breathing steadily through the filter. While he crouches to gather some plants from the ground, the sinister voice of his cursed sword begins to whisper in his mind that it desperately needs blood. One of the hunters sighs tiredly and suggests everyone take a quick break to rest, while the young man remains crouched, silently observing the situation. The friendly man jokes with Gaon, calling him Young 0.5, saying that with such low karma, he probably doesn't even need to rest, and the youth just chuckles awkwardly. He remembers that the employee suggested measuring his index again after the mission because she thought the device glitched, and he wonders why the machine broke right on his turn. The hunters chat discouraged about the harvest, complaining that the mission is a total failure and that so far they've only managed to find common, worthless herbs. Suddenly, one of the men begins to cough and gasp very heavily, with a sinister red smoke rising around his body. Looking closely, it's visible that the hunter's eyes are turning red and corrupted while he struggles hard to breathe under his mask. Worried, his companions approach and ask if he is okay, immediately recognizing those clear signs of the start of dark corruption. Without wasting time, the hunter grabs a special syringe and forcefully injects it directly into his own arm to contain the dangerous symptoms of the infection. He lets out a groan of pain while grinding his teeth, trembling heavily as the chemical substance begins to take effect and circulate through his body. He tries to reassure the group, saying he is fine and that a dose of morphine solves the issue, asserting that he didn't become a professional hunter for nothing. The companion advises Gaon not to push himself so he won't suffer from corruption, warning that he must rest after missions and always look after his mask filter. Suddenly, the sound of suspicious footsteps coming from the middle of the bushes catches the attention of all the hunters gathered there resting. The hunter Park Jun-sik emerges from the trees and calls everyone to gather around, asking how long they are going to keep picking cheap herbs for crumbs. He reveals with a serious look that right ahead he found the exact spot the association employee had ordered them to avoid, a goblin settlement. A wild goblin with green skin and glowing red eyes emerges screaming furiously, raising a crude stone axe to attack the invaders. The veteran hunters act fast and open fire together, unleashing a hail of bullets that hits the charging monsters head-on as they screech in pain. Park Jun-sik just lets out a disdainful sigh as several goblins leap fiercely toward him with pieces of wood and axes in hand. He activates a special acceleration skill through a glowing ring on his finger, preparing his next move at an unbelievable speed. Moving like a swift blur, Park Jun-sik eliminates all the surrounding goblins with precise shots, mocking the slowness of the creatures as they drop dead to the ground. Gaon watches impressed and thinks the fight is moving so fast that he can't even find an opening to attack, while his sword catches the scent of fresh blood. The young man looks in the direction pointed out by the demon sword and mentally asks if the fresh blood it talks so much about is coming from near those straw huts. Suddenly, a goblin leaps from the top of a tree toward Gaon, brandishing a heavy piece of wood to strike him by surprise on the head. The sword soul despairs and warns Gaon that he is far too kind-hearted, alerting him that in a moment of extreme danger like this, he cannot hesitate to fight. However, Gaon reacts with extreme speed and slices the goblin in half with a single precise strike of his sword, leaving even the demon weapon completely speechless. The young man asks what that was about, and the sword explains it, thought he would refuse to fight due to having a gentle personality that preaches violence is bad. Gaon recalls that the orphanage director always taught him that no matter what happened, he should never use any type of violence against people he remembers when he was a kid, and innocently asked the director if it would be fine to use violence if the target in question wasn't a human being. Back then, the orphanage director simply flashed a massive smile and gave a thumbs up, confirming the boy's reasoning was correct. Returning to the present, the demon's sword begins to absorb a black smoke coming from the dead monster. Joyfully celebrating finally having a decent meal, Gaon feels a strange energy entering his body, and the sword explains that is karma itself, and that by absorbing it, he is taking the enemy's soul. It continues explaining that ordinary hunters complain about karma because they only absorb leftovers, but the true power comes from absorbing the entire soul like they do. Meanwhile, one of the veteran hunters in the group draws a sharp knife from his gear and approaches the body of one of the defeated creatures on the ground. He begins cutting off the dead monster's ears to use as proof of kill, laughing as he comments that making 50,000 won per ear is a very good profit. Gaon approaches and the group asks the reason for his delay, hearing from him that he ended up defeating a goblin near the hut, which leaves everyone surprised by his first kill. Park Jun-sik says they can gather the ears later and focus on finding the cursed relic, pointing in the direction where he senses the goblin chief is hiding as they walk. The warriors talk about the relic's value and make happy plans about how they are going to spend the massive cash taking care of family or buying rings. Shortly after, the group arrives in front of a large wooden cabin that has several human skulls impaled outside, indicating it is the chief's base. Being very careful not to make unnecessary noise, Park Jun-sik pushes the wooden door, which creaks slightly, to peer into the dark lair. Looking inside the room through the crack in the door, Gaeon's eyes widen behind his mask and he is completely shocked by the terrifying scene he sees. Inside the dark cabin, lit by torches, there are goblin bodies strewn across the wooden floor and a sinister figure sitting at the back with a skull staff. The monster flashes a macabre smile full of sharp teeth, and its eyes glow intensely, a bright crimson tone, revealing itself as the terrifying leader of that place. It is a dangerous goblin shaman who rises enveloped in a sinister aura of red energy while holding his staff and letting out a terrifying screech. He raises the staff with both hands and lets out an extremely sharp squeal, releasing his dark magic that makes the entire wooden cabin tremble. The shaman widens his red eyes and shouts a magical activation word to conjure a powerful spell against the human invaders. However, before he can manage to do anything, a precise shot hits right in the middle of his forehead in the blink of an eye, interrupting the ritual. The monster's lifeless body collapses heavily onto the wooden floor, while the other hunters watch the scene from behind with weapons drawn. The hunter who shot says awkwardly that he got startled and ended up firing by accident, but his companion reassures him, praising the shot's precision. Next, one of the men approaches the shaman's corpse and carefully removes a golden ring with a glowing purple gem from his long green finger. He celebrates, saying that item looks highly valuable, while his colleague warns about the possibility of the ring being cursed, which would ruin the prophet. Gaeon asks for permission to take a look at the ring, and the man hands the item over, warning him to just look and absolutely never put it on his finger for safety. Upon seeing the gem, Gaeon's cursed sword senses the object's danger and whispers to itself that the young man should absolutely not hand that back to his colleague. However, Gaeon acts very strangely and slips the ring onto his own finger, giving a bizarre laugh and obsessively saying that it is his precious mentally. The young man sees himself completely bare inside a totally dark and empty space, facing a mysterious multicolored flash that appears right in front of him. A dark voice coming from the smoke asks if he desires power, but the youth answers calmly that he has no interest, leaving the entity totally confused. The voice then promises to grant any wish he has, and the young man excitedly asks if it could even give a large special beef burger combo. The entity says yes, but stumbles over its words, making Gaeon conclude it can't do it, which leaves the voice desperately insisting that it is capable of doing so. The dark smoke explains that he must offer a sacrifice in exchange for his wish, and the young man naturally asks what he would need to hand over to it. It demands the sacrifice of the souls of 3 human companions, but Gaeon decides to pull his hand back and calmly says he prefers to look around a bit more. First, Gaeon instantly snaps back to reality and stands still calmly, staring at the ring on his fingers without showing any reaction of evil possession. The other hunters point their weapons at Gaeon again, explaining startled that they thought he had truly been possessed by the curse after that imitation. Gaeon calmly hands the ring back to its owners, while the others begin to worry as they notice Kim Tae-jin is exhaling a massive amount of purple smoke. Seeing that Tae-jin's eyes have turned black, the men decide to run out of the cabin, agreeing that they need to get back to the portal quickly before it gets worse. Tae-jin walks with extreme difficulty and tries to lie, saying he is fine, claiming the symptoms will vanish as soon as he manages to change his mask filter. Suddenly, Park Jun-sik approaches from behind, readying his rifle, and coldly states that there is a much simpler solution than changing the guy's filter. The cursed sword senses Jun-sik's murderous intent and screams desperately in Gaeon's mind, telling its wielder to dodge that danger immediately. Without any hesitation, Jun-sik fires a violent burst at his own companions, killing the 3 warriors who fall to the ground, crying out in pain. With a cold and relentless expression on his face, he quickly turns the aim of his firearm toward Gaeon to eliminate the sole remaining witness. Gaeon lets out a startled cry and manages to run in time to hide behind the cabin's wooden wall while the projectiles whiz right past his head. While the young man breathes heavily and fearfully in his hiding spot, Jun-sik clicks his tongue, surprised that a mere rookie managed to dodge his shots. The youth realizes with terror that the shot he just dodged completely broke his gas mask filter. Realizing he came dangerously close to losing his head, he rips the broken mask off his face with absolute rage and shouts indignantly at the traitor, demanding to know what he thinks he's doing shooting his partners. The greedy hunter answers very calmly that keeping all the valuable profit just for himself is much better than splitting the money 5 ways. The young man calls him crazy and warns that the association will find out, but Jun-sik explains laughing that when he returns with the relic, the portal will close forever. He runs after the youth, shouting that now only Gaon is left to die too, forcing the young man to flee at high speed through the camp's trees. Junsik keeps shooting non-stop from a distance and complains, irritated that the boy is extremely fast and hard to hit. Clicking his tongue in dissatisfaction, Gaon runs agilely to shield himself from the bullets shredding the surrounding foliage, holding the hilt of his sword tightly while searching for a counter-attack plan. In a desperate move, the young man throws his cursed sword into the air toward the shooter, creating the perfect visual distraction to manage a counter-strike. He reloads his rifle calmly and ironically asks how long the boy thinks he'll manage to keep running from that hail of bullets. Looking out from behind the cabin wall to shoot again, the hunter's eyes widen as he realizes the young man has completely vanished from his field of view. To his surprise, Gaon's sword keeps flying and spinning rapidly in the air around him, emitting a loud whizzing sound and stopping him from focusing. He curses furiously upon noticing the young man bypass the ambush, and Gaon shouts, calling him a foolish idiot while rushing with speed from behind his blind spot. Junsik smiles arrogantly, seeing the boy approach without a sword, mocking him for throwing away the only weapon he had available to defend himself. However, the traitor's arrogance vanishes instantly, and his eye widens in pure terror as he realizes something much worse is about to happen. Gaon moves so fast that he managed to catch his sword back in the air, positioning himself right in front of the startled opponent with an extremely focused gaze. With a single swift and perfect slash, the youth cuts Junsik's rifle in half, shattering the firearm into pieces before he could manage to pull the trigger. The pieces of the destroyed rifle fall onto the grass, while Junsik stumbles back in fear, facing the silvery blade that gleams threateningly right ahead of him. Gaon raises his sword with both hands above his head, preparing a final blow against the traitor who watches the sharp blade, sweating cold in absolute despair. Suddenly, Gaon's calm expression completely shifts into a wide, psychopathic, and totally insane grin, revealing just how much he is enjoying the situation. The youth begins chasing the desperate traitor through the forest with his sword raised, laughing like a true maniac, while the man runs screaming in terror. Gaon delivers a precise slash across the fleeing adversary's back, ironically exclaiming that a wound on the back is the ultimate disgrace for a warrior, feeling intense pain. Junsik curses in rage and activates the accelerated speed once more through his glowing ring in a desperate bid to escape. The traitor runs at high speed, leaving tracks behind, while Gaon follows hot on his heels with sword in hand, asking out loud where he thinks he's going. Displaying a sadistic expression, the young man shouts, promising he won't kill him, begging him to stay still because he is only going to cut one of his arms off, completely terrified by that insanity. The hunter screams desperately, telling the crazy boy to stay far away from him as he keeps running. Using every bit of energy he has left, Junsik runs like a madman through the trunks and dense vegetation of the dark forest to try and save his life. He finally stops behind a massive tree to catch his breath, panting heavily as he tries to listen to the surroundings and wonders if he managed to lose him. Coughing blood, he deduces that Gaon became corrupted upon removing his mask, and grows worried remembering his own filter is broken, and he needs to get out of there soon. Suddenly, the hunter's eyes widen as he looks down and notices a very important detail that he ended up letting slip during all that chaos. He immediately recalls the mysterious purple gem ring that was with the goblin shaman and realizes the valuable object was left behind, along with the colleagues' bodies. He bitterly laments in his thoughts, realizing he should have grabbed the magic ring from the ground before he started running desperately from that place. Junsik grinds his teeth in anger and decides he needs to head back to the spot to recover the ring. Frustrated that everything went so wrong in his profitable mission, little did he know that Gaon had already found him, emerging from behind the exact same tree with a macabre smile and making the hunter let out a scream of absolute panic. Desperate, he manages to barely evade another sword strike and goes back to running like a madman through the forest, screaming in fear at the boy's return. He plans in his mind to find a spell quickly to open the portal and escape from there, but ends up spotting something on the ground ahead that catches his attention. It is one of the assault rifles belonging to his deceased companions. Lying on the grass right next to the bloody body of one of the group's warriors, he throws himself to the ground to grab the weapon while letting out a victorious laugh, shouting that Gaon is dead now, while the youth approaches running in the background. Laughing with the rifle in hand, he prepares to aim at the youth, but suddenly stops upon noticing a pair of mysterious legs standing right in front of him in an intimidating manner. He raises his head slowly and freezes completely in terror upon seeing that the person before him has one arm totally modified and darkened. To his horror, it is Kim Tae-jin, who just transformed into a gigantic and deformed monster under the influence of a terrible purple energy, without giving any chance for defense. The monstrous creature delivers a crushing blow with its giant arm, hitting Jun-sik head-on and knocking him to the ground. Gae-on observes the entire scene hidden from afar, growing very tense upon hearing the bestial roars of the corrupted hunter, who now exhales an intimidating magical power. The monster lets out another terrifying roar through its mask, while its left eye glows with an intense purple light, indicating a total loss of control. The young man realizes the situation has completely changed faces upon seeing the gigantic mutant hunter standing over the defeated body of the traitor who tried to kill them. Without thinking twice, Gaon uses his speed to run back and hide behind one of the straw huts to avoid being located by the creature. He leans against the wooden wall holding his silvery sword tightly, concluding in shock that the veteran companion ended up turning into a monster. The youth remembers that the veteran already didn't seem in very good health earlier, but is impressed to see that the dark corruption process occurred so quickly. Gaon notices that the monster is wearing the goblin shaman's ring and concludes he must have accepted the cursed object's temptation to avoid dying from the infection. At that moment, he recalls the voice of the gem that demanded the sacrifice of 3 of its own kind and begins piecing together what just happened there. He realizes with terror that the creature used the souls of the 3 hunters who were murdered by Jun-sik as the required sacrifice to obtain the ring's power hidden behind the wall. The youth takes a quick glance out of the corner of his eye toward the danger and asks in his thoughts what they should do. The monster lets out a terrifying roar and smashes the dirt ground with a powerful punch, creating a major impact that kicks up dust and stones around. The young man observes that demonstration of destructive force, swallowing hard, realizing the mutant opponent's physical strength is absurdly superior to before facing so much danger. Gaon comically decides that the best thing to do is to get out of there, but his demon sword immediately opposes and commands him to fight the monster. He complains, saying the weapon is far too bloodthirsty and that it's going to end up getting him killed, but the sword warns that he will never manage to outrun such a fast mutant. It adds that its senses are highly sharpened, making any stealthy escape impossible, and the youth asks if by chance the sword has a better idea. The demon weapon coldly answers, telling the boy to fight to the end and die with honor like a true warrior, leaving Gaon totally speechless. Suddenly, the mutant giant lets out another of his bestial howling and destroys a wooden fence with a single slap. Advancing toward where he caught the boy's scent, Gaon throws himself to the ground to escape just in time from a devastating punch that shatters a thick tree trunk right behind where he was previously hidden. The young man manages to hide again behind another trunk, while the dark, energy-covered mutant monster looks from side to side searching for his track. Gaon remembers the promise of power in exchange for blood, so he approaches the corpse of a goblin defeated earlier and drives his blade into it to feed the weapon. He complains about not feeling the same power as before, and the sword explains that if he didn't perform the kill with his own hands, the amount of karma received is smaller. The weapon ironically tells him not to expect an easy life, while the youth remains kneeling on the grass stabbing other nearby monster corpses. The terrible mutant hunter lets out another of his monstrous roars from very close by, making the ground shake and indicating he is about to find the hiding spot. After absorbing the remaining blood from the bodies on the ground, Gaon raises his blade wrapped in black smoke and asks Hyukryo if that amount is already enough. Holding the demon sword's hilt with great firmness and determination, the weapon's mysterious voice finally answers its wielder that it will be enough. The boy prepares to spring from his hiding place while the mutant snarls wildly very nearby, drooling heavily from its deformed mouth. Due to the terrible infection, Gaon charges forward with a swift leap, shouting, "Whatever happens, happens." But the sword realistically says that with this power, he will manage to deliver at least one good strike. The young man stops midair and screams desperately, upon realizing the weapon's advice still means he is going to end up dying at the end of the fight anyway. The sword tries to calm him down, explaining that the enemy just became corrupted and doesn't master the ring yet, so if he has plenty of luck, he might make it out alive. Gaon recalls that the gain is smaller if the kill isn't made by oneself, realizing the sacrificed hunters were already dead by Jun-sik's hands. Based on this, the youth deduces that the giant monster hasn't managed to obtain its full destructive force potential through the magic ring it's wearing yet. Without wasting any more time, the youth begins spinning his cursed sword with great skill in the air and throws it again like a boomerang toward the enemy. Hyukryo figures out the youth's plan and complains furiously at being used as bait once again, while the mutant hunter gets distracted trying to hit the flying weapon. Gaon celebrates the plan's success and sprints at high speed through the creature's blind spot, which is far too busy dealing blows against the flying sword. The boy focuses his gaze intensely forward and strains to remember the exact path, running firmly toward the spot he had planned from the very start. He arrives in front of a gigantic pile containing all the dead goblin bodies that the hunters had previously gathered and accumulated near that cabin. At that exact moment, Gaon extends his arm forward and catches the hilt of his demon sword back, which comes flying directly to his right hand. He throws himself into the air and drives the sword with all his might into the middle of the monster pile, shouting for Hyukryo to drink its fill while the weapon begins sucking their blood. The cursed sword's red gem glows intensely as it absorbs massive amounts of dark energy, letting out exclamations of pure ecstasy. The young man stands watching, impressed as the pile of corpses is completely engulfed by a massive and frightening flare of red mystical energy. Nervous about the delay, the boy begs for the weapon to suck the blood faster, but the sword jokes saying he might end up with indigestion if he eats too fast. The terrible mutant hunter notices the strong magical presence coming from behind and lets out another of his bestial howls while quickly turning his head toward Gaon. Without wasting time, the dark-skinned, sharp-clawed monster runs on all fours like a wild beast, charging at high speed directly against the young man's refuge. Gaon looks back startled and panics seeing the creature rushing toward him like a runaway train while his sword is still stuck in the pile. He flees running desperately and shouts, asking if the weapon hasn't finished feeding yet, while the enraged mutant throws himself headfirst against the monster pile. The youth lets out a startled exclamation, glancing back and noticing once again the impressive speed with which the enemy manages to pursue him from there. To try and save himself, Gaon suddenly points his index finger toward the sky behind the monster and shouts out loud, asking what that strange thing in the air is. The monster falls for the silly trick and looks back for a moment, making Gaon comically realize that his bizarre tactic to buy time didn't work out very well. He remembers he can't run too far because the sword returns to its owner if it passes a distance of 3 meters, leaving only the monster's blood as his trump card. The beast leaps, delivering a devastating claw strike right at Gaon's back, making the youth scream desperately for the name of his faithful cursed sword. At the final second, the sword responds, glowing a glowing red tone, and lets out a celebratory shout upon finishing absorbing all the goblin's energy. The boy flashes a confident expression with a focused gaze and clenched teeth, realizing that is the perfect moment to pull off his decisive play in the fight. He slides agilely across the dirt ground, dodging with millimeter precision the mutant's sharp claws that pass right above him. Gaon finishes his swift movement, stopping his body on the ground in an imposing combat stance, kicking up a curtain of dust as he prepares to counterattack. The giant hunter turns slowly toward the adversary, while Gaon remains crouched in the background, focused on the enemy, who is now very close to the goblin pile. Suddenly, the cursed sword detaches itself on its own from the corpse pile and flies at high speed, slicing through the air back toward its skilled wielder. Gaon leaps and catches the weapon's hilt masterfully in the air, flashing a confident and fearless smile as he feels all the power flowing through the red blade. The youth opens a wide and challenging smile, with his eyes glowing intensely, demonstrating that he is completely ready for the final confrontation against the opponent. On the other side, the mutant monster opens its deformed maw and displays its long red tongue while letting out another violent howl, irritated by the boy's resilience. The demon sword's voice whispers in his mind with great authority, commanding its wielder to deliver the next physical blow using absolutely all his strength. With a piercing battle cry, Gaon raises his right arm and delivers a devastating sword slash that cuts the wind, unleashing a wave of reddish energy. The attack hits the mutant giant's chest with extreme precision and violence, spraying a large amount of dark blood through the air of the goblin camp. Feeling the terrible pain of the deep cut across his chest, the bright-eyed monster tilts his head back and lets out a deafening roar of pure physical agony. Capitalizing on the opening generated by the wound, the cursed sword gives the final command in Gaon's mind, telling the boy to pierce the corrupted creature's heart once and for all. The youth obeys immediately and advances with a swift leap toward the weakened adversary, holding the blade firmly to deliver a fatal thrust to his chest. He aims exactly at the giant monster's chest, which has its clothes torn due to the previous combat, exposing its mutant skin completely vulnerable to the attack. Gaon focuses all his attention on that single vital spot of the enemy, demonstrating in his gaze that he doesn't intend to make any type of mistake or hesitation at that moment. With impeccable precision, the sharp tip of the silvery blade strikes directly at the creature's chest region, initiating the blow that will define the outcome of that fight. He drives the demon sword deeply into the mutant hunter's heart, causing a massive amount of blood to spray backward as it pierces through the monster's body with the force of the devastating impact. Gaon knocks the mutant giant onto his back on the packed dirt ground, keeping the blade pinned firmly directly in his chest. With an implacable expression filled with anger on his face, the youth shouts out loud for his demon sword to devour all the dark energy present in the opponent's body. The corrupted hunter lets out his last agonizing roar as a massive amount of dark smoke begins to be sucked from his body by the blade of Gaon's sword. As the dark energy is drained away, Kim Tae-jin's protective mask completely shatters, and he begins to let out painful groans while returning to human form. Completely weakened and back to his normal state, the man regains consciousness for a moment and focuses his trembling gaze on Gaon with great difficulty. Meanwhile, far away from there, in a modern security and management facility belonging to the Bureau, audio alarms begin to ring insistently through the place. A male employee in a suit runs desperately to the section chief's room to give an urgent warning that facility vault number 6 has been breached again. The section chief turns with immense anger and demands to know what happened, hearing that an employee from the quarantine sector was just possessed by a cursed object. He curses, saying that the vault is already operating at its maximum capacity, indignantly questioning when the association will finally build a new warehouse for the items. While a group of armed security walks hurriedly through the hallways under the sound of sirens, the section chief complains that these cursed objects still spellbind people even while locked in the shelter. At that moment, Park Do-kyung and Kang Chung-hwa arrive at the scene accompanied by armed guards, greeting Section Chief Kim professionally. The section chief asks where the other members are, and Do-kyung answers that they will arrive shortly, directing everyone to prepare to breach as soon as they arrive. The chief sighs irritated at the cursed objects, complaining that it would be great if they could simply throw them all away in a specific trash can for it. Do-kyung remains in absolute silence, staring at the man thoughtfully, seriously reflecting on that unusual idea of a specific trash can. Meanwhile, back in the forest, Gaon holds the shaman's ring and lets out a long sigh of relief for finally surviving that terrible life or death trial. He looks down at Kim Tae-jin's unconscious body lying on the dirt and wonders if the danger is finally over as the man begins to gradually regain consciousness. Days later, Do-kyung measures Gaon's karma index in a closed room, growing surprised to notice that the registered value dropped even lower, marking 1,865. The leader explains that his index was at over 6,000 when he returned from the portal, finding it unbelievable that it dropped to the 1,800 range in such a short time. He highlights that the young man easily rejected the contract with the cursed ring and still managed to successfully reverse his veteran companion's dark corruption. Facing all these facts, Do-kyung adopts an extremely serious stance and says he would like to make a very important proposal to the black-haired lad. He directly asks if Gaon would agree to become the official trash can of the Hunter Administration Bureau, leaving the young man totally failing to understand the proposal. The youth makes an expression of extreme aversion and strangeness upon hearing the term trash can, totally confused by the direction that business talk was taking. Embarrassed, Do-kyung gestures and quickly corrects himself nervously, clarifying that he actually wanted to propose that he become the Bureau's vault number 7. He clears his throat and recalls that turning someone corrupted back to normal is a monumental and unprecedented feat which had never been recorded in history. The man explains that there are items that absorb karma, but accumulating so much dark energy usually corrupts and destroys the user's mind and soul quickly. He emphasizes that Gaon is different because he doesn't get corrupted even while absorbing a lot of karma, managing to purify and digest that dark energy with incredible speed. Do-kyung further highlights that, in addition to all this incredible rapid purification capacity, Gaon's daily karma index is maintained at an abnormally low level. The team leader asserts that after performing several detailed analyses of his behavior and his data, the inevitable conclusion the entire team reached is, he reveals with conviction, that the young hunter possesses the legendary immunity to corruption, an extremely rare condition that many thought was just a grand myth. Do-kyung emphasizes the importance of that, saying that with this unique skill, Gaon has the potential to save countless human lives and maybe even the entire country. Still processing the revelation about the immunity, the lad curiously asks what exactly the leader meant by suggesting he become a human vault. He explains that the Bureau uses expensive vaults to store cursed items, and that keeping just a single object locked away there costs tens of millions of won a year. Do-kyung proposes that if he agrees to keep the cursed objects with him, the agency will pay a storage fee of at least 5 million won for each item. Gaeon's eyes widen and his mouth opens in absolute shock upon hearing that absurd value, mentally repeating if he would really receive 5 million for each object stored. The lad begins to happily fantasize in a comical way, imagining the gigantic mountain of delicious burgers he would be capable of buying with that much money. Trying to hide his excitement, Gaeon seriously says he needs time to think about the proposal because he still doesn't fully understand his own condition. Do-kyung agrees and suggests a time frame of 1 week so they can report the case to the higher-ups and prepare the necessary tests, and the lad accepts the agreement. The young hunter nods positively with his head respectfully, wrapping up the meeting and preparing to return to his house to think about the proposal. Later on, the director of the bureau, Oh Kyung-tae, slams the table and asks irritated if leader Do-kyung truly believes that absurd story makes any sense. He incredulously questions the initial karma index of 0.58 and how the value could drop from 6,000 to 2,000 in a very few hours, maintaining his firm and professional posture. Do-kyung assures the superior that he performed the measurement himself and personally confirmed that all data are real. The old director, Oh Kyung-tae, remains in silence for a few moments, furrowing his brow behind his golden glasses while processing the gravity of that situation. The director reflects that about 10 years have already passed since humanity first connected to the dark world through the emergence of the red portals. He thinks that although they discovered new resources and valuable minerals, the number of dangerous cursed objects also grew proportionally in the country. The man grows worried, noting that South Korea ended up completely saturated and filled with dangerous items capable of corrupting and destroying the population. Oh Kyung-tae drums his fingers lightly on his office's wooden desk, keeping his thoughtful gaze fixed on the performance reports of the youth Gaeon. He murmurs thoughtfully about the existence of a hunter capable of absorbing and digesting karma in such a short period of time, assessing the potential the lad possesses. Do-kyung explains that he plans to perform the first tests using volunteers from his own team, revealing that the quarantine sector has already agreed to collaborate. Satisfied with the planning presented by the leader, the director hits the wooden desk hard and celebrates in a firm tone of approval, finding the plan excellent. The director asserts that in the general chief's absence, Do-kyung is the highest authority as the second team leader and that the task force's responsibility is in his hands, pointing his index finger in an authoritative and decisive manner. Oh Kyung-tae gives the definitive order for the team leader to proceed immediately with Gaeon's tests. 4 days pass after that important meeting, and the group gathers again in the spacious main lobby of the Hunter Bureau's modern administrative building. Gaeon arrives at the location and greets the leader with a respectful bow, and Do-kyung receives him cordially, asking if everything went well during these past few days. The lad answers that everything went well and that he performed only a few simple missions, casually adding that he ended up definitively awakening his mana recently. Surprised, Do-kyung asks if he really awakened his mana, and the young man explains calmly that this occurred right after Hyukryo digested the karma absorbed in the mission. Gaeon takes advantage of the moment to ask how veteran Kim Tae-jin's health is, laments that he didn't manage to get enough free time to visit him at the hospital. The leader reassures him, saying the man recovered well, and that the doctors managed to reattach his arm through surgery, leaving the youth much more relieved. The elevator emits a sharp beep indicating it reached the correct destination floor, and the metallic door opens, revealing the testing area Gaeon was anticipating so much. Taking the first step out, the youth timidly greets the team led by Agent Kang Chung-hwa and the armed guards who were already waiting for him. One of the responsible team employees flashes a warm and friendly smile upon spotting the lad, offering official welcomes to Yoon Ga-on at the start of the test. The lad shakes hands with Kim Jong-ho, the chief of the bureau's quarantine sector. Greeting him cordially and formally introducing himself as Yoon Ga-on, Kim Jong-ho invites the group to follow him through the high-security hallways, guiding them toward the area where the test's special evaluations will be performed. The sector chief gestures excitedly and promises to do a guided tour to present the facilities of South Korea's cursed object vault number 6. The military jeep starts up and its tires begin spinning rapidly on the smooth ground, releasing smoke as the vehicle accelerates to start the tour through the immense location. They ride the jeep through the immense underground hangar, which features several gigantic shelves packed with sealed metallic boxes containing the dangerous items. Gaeon looks around impressed by the height and space of the underground hangar, curiously asking if there is any specific reason for the location to be so gigantic. The guide clarifies that leaving these items very close can cause chain reactions and make a hypnotized user try to steal all the other objects from there. Gaeon lets out a mental exclamation of surprise at the scientist's detailed explanation, finally understanding the need to keep the boxes so distant. Next, the young man spots a massive gray block of concrete tied with steel cables and asks shocked if they really poured concrete over the artifacts. The guide confirms laughing that a regular civilian wouldn't manage to break that even with 100 days of hammering, revealing that there is a double iron safe inside the concrete. Kim Jong-ho opens the vehicle's metallic door and steps down excitedly, announcing that they have finally reached the spot where the practical testing phase will begin. He taps lightly on the concrete block, suggesting they remove some lower-level items to test, pointing to one of them while the others nod their heads in agreement. Leader Du Kyung and Agent Kang Chung-hwa murmur with tense and worried expressions, knowing the imminent danger of releasing a cursed object even if it is a weak one. Using heavy pickaxes, the agents begin delivering strong strikes against the concrete to break it, making dust and sparks rise with each impact of the metal. The scientist explains from afar that the truly dangerous items are stored at the back, deciding to initiate the test using only the lowest-level cursed relics. Suddenly, the sector chief falls silent and looks back, sweating cold with a shocked expression. Realizing the young hunter is no longer standing there next to them, the scientist falls onto his back on the ground, screaming in terror upon seeing the military jeep suddenly start up on its own and violently accelerate through the middle of the underground hangar. He props himself on the ground, completely confused and startled, watching the military vehicle distance itself at high speed, heading toward the deepest area of the large vault. The scientist stammers, horrified, asking what he is doing, and Do-kyung realizes with tension that the youth is heading straight for the highest-level relics. While driving toward the danger under the sound of sinister whispers commanding him to approach, Gaeon is overtaken by obsessive thoughts guided by his sword, with his eyes glowing purple and an insane smile on his face. The youth steps hard on the accelerator, screaming like a madman, eager to collect more cursed items. Drop a like and comment if you want to see what happens next.